U.S. President Donald Trump said Benjamin Netanyahu must be responsible about Lebanon and let Syria handle Hezbollah in comments to reporters at the G7 summit.
The European Parliament voted to adopt the EU-US deal struck last summer by US President and European Commission President.
U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday at the G7 summit that he is not happy with Israel's conduct in Lebanon in their operations against the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. He said Hezbollah remains a problem for the region, but suggested that Israel's response had gone too far and could jeopardize stability in the Middle East.
I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. And I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it.
Trump's comments come as the U.S. and Iran are preparing to sign a framework deal to end the war, which Iran said on Tuesday hinges on Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, a condition Israel has already rejected and that could potentially sink the agreement.
Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
A U.S. official familiar with the outlines of the agreement has said the deal did not call for an Israeli withdrawal. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that Israel would remain in Lebanon as long as necessary. Iran outmaneuvered U.S. President Donald Trump in negotiations for a deal to end the war, according to his former national security advisor John Bolton. In an interview with Euronews, Bolton argued that the framework agreement favored Iran and said the U.S. president had prioritized economic concerns over strategic considerations.
No, I think it's a very bad deal for the United States. Trump isn't thinking about the geostrategic implications of the deal. He's thinking of one thing. He wants the Strait open. He wants Gulf oil on international markets. He wants the price of gasoline at the pump down. That's all he cares about. Trump is desperate for a deal. He's desperate for a deal, and they have maneuvered him. They've played him like a violin. That's why they've got the deal that they want.
On the contents of the deal, Bolton raised concerns about the absence of a published text, arguing that the details of any deal matter more than its headline provisions.
Well, I think it's embarrassing to the president. I think there's going to be some indication of unfreezing of Iranian assets, which he roundly criticized Barack Obama for back in 2016, and which I think is a mistake. I think it's a mistake to give this brutal theocracy any of the assets. I'm happy to give the assets back to Iran when it's under a free government. That's not where we are now.
Bolton said the approach reflected Trump's focus on keeping energy prices low ahead of November's midterm elections, arguing that the U.S. would not carry out further strikes on Iran before then.
United States President Donald Trump has signaled he's ready to re-engage on ending Russia's war in Ukraine, telling G7 leaders gathered in France that Washington will now turn its attention back to the conflict. Speaking during a bilateral meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, Trump stated that since the framework deal with Iran is finished, the administration is going to focus on Ukraine.
Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two. Think of it. This is on a monthly basis. They averaged 25,000 people. We had a meeting, and we'll see how. I spoke with President Putin on Sunday.
Although the comment is welcomed in European capitals, leaders remain skeptical whether Trump's renewed interest translates into meaningful diplomatic pressures. Invited by French President Emmanuel Macron, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was an attendee on Tuesday's G7 working session and held a private trilateral meeting with Trump and Macron, which took over an hour, according to media reports. Meanwhile, Russia continued to launch a fresh barrage of drones and missiles at Ukraine that killed 11 people on Monday, contrasting Trump's words about his phone call with Putin on Sunday, describing it as a productive conversation. US-mediated peace talks on the Ukraine war had effectively been frozen since February, when the Iran war started. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that he hopes to bring the war to an end before next winter or secure a ceasefire, warning that Vladimir Putin is deliberately avoiding direct talks. Speaking at the G7 summit in France, Zelensky confirmed he asked United States President Donald Trump for the transfer of licenses to manufacture Patriot air defense systems domestically. The US leader responded positively, Zelensky said. Kyiv is prioritizing anti-ballistic production as the war in the Middle East has depleted nearly one-third of global Patriot interceptor stockpiles, leaving Ukraine vulnerable to missile strikes. But Ukraine has mastered drone countering expertise, maintaining a 90% interception rate using domestic technology. This expertise has turned Ukraine into an air defense provider, with Zelensky announcing that Kyiv is now finalizing a major drone production deal with Canada to expand security cooperation.
At the Eurosatory International Defence Exhibition, the focus this year is on the expertise acquired by Ukrainians since 2022 and the start of the war launched by Russia. Some 80 companies are present, compared to 10 at the previous edition in 2024, making Ukraine the fifth largest national delegation in terms of exhibitors after France, the United States, Germany and Australia. At this exhibition, which runs through Friday, Kiev will showcase weapons that have proven their effectiveness against Russia. This increased presence is also due to the exposure of European capability gaps as European nations seek to draw on Ukraine's experience.
I've been traveling around Europe recently, talking to different big, actually prime defense producers, and realized that in many cases there is absolutely lack of understanding how the modern battlefield looks like, how the battlefield looks like in Ukraine.
The war with Russia has also pushed Ukraine to increase its capacity to produce weapons and drones in large quantities and at lower costs. The likelihood of a clash with Russia in the east is growing. According to several senior officials, the relative stability taking hold on the Ukrainian front could prompt Vladimir Putin to launch an offensive elsewhere in Europe. The European Parliament voted on Tuesday to adopt the EU-US deal struck last summer by US President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Turnberry. The final green light needed to implement the agreement comes as Trump threatened on Monday to impose tariffs on French wine and champagne if Paris did not remove its digital tax on US big tech. The vote allows the EU to remove its duties on most US industrial goods, while Europeans commit to paying 15% US tariffs on goods exported to the United States. Since Trump has shown that he is willing to use tariffs as a coercive tool against European partners on issues unrelated to trade, EU lawmakers sought to introduce safeguards into the agreement to shield it from future pressure from the US administration. A sunset clause was introduced into the final agreement to end the trade deal on the 31st of March 2029, at which point Trump's term will be over unless it is renewed. MEPs also secured a provision allowing the Commission to suspend the trade agreement at the request of either Parliament or a member state if the US fails to lift tariffs on European steel and aluminium by the end of 2026.
Almost 2.4 million refugees will need to be resettled next year, the United Nations said on Tuesday, at a time when numerous countries, such as the United States, have slashed refugee admissions. The UN Refugee Agency warned of a shortage of options for refugees who cannot return home because of war, violence and persecution and face risks in their country of asylum. The UNHCR urged to expand resettlement, increase refugees' quotas and accelerate processing. 2.37 million people from 43 countries of origin and living in 76 countries of asylum would need resettling elsewhere next year, according to a UNHCR's annual report. Afghan refugees are the largest group in need of resettlement. They are followed by people from South Sudan, Sudan and Syria, as well as Rohingya refugees from Myanmar living in vast camps in Bangladesh. The number of refugees who need to be resettled is down 6% from last year's report. It was partially due to Afghans returning from Iran and Pakistan under adverse circumstances and voluntary returns to Syria following the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in December 2024.
Stalactites, the sound of water dripping on rock. In the heart of Paris, the public can now wander through a cave without having to go underground. Just a stone's throw from Notre Dame, artist JR, a specialist in XXL photo collage, has transformed the Pont Neuf into a cave. A soundscape created by a former member of Daft Punk. A gigantic structure with varying heights, nothing has been left to chance to transport passerby far from Paris.
Vraiment une immersion absolue entre le bruit, la lumière qui est tamisée et cette sensation à la fois d'enfermement mais finalement quand même une certaine liberté.
On a vraiment l'impression d'être dans une grotte, il y a des petits bruits de vent, c'est assez sombre, le relief est très très bien fait, on a l'impression de pouvoir voir et même toucher des stalactites.
It was very interesting to go through it and also remembering, oh, okay, I'm walking on a bridge.
In 1985, the Pont Neuf had already been wrapped in fabric. The work by the artist couple Christo and Jeanne-Claude, now deceased, had attracted millions of visitors. The opening of La Caverne was delayed by 10 days. Rain and wind had damaged the massive inflatable structure. The public can now visit the artwork until June the 28th, this time under sunny skies according to the forecast.